Is Syria going to get chopped up into different territories? Maybe. Remember that the country that is known as Syria today did not always look like this, because how many countries have natural borders as these diagonal lines? What we know of Syria is just a piece of land that was carved up with a ruler on a map in the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1917. So we owe it to the French and the British for why it looks like this. The same is true for Iraq, Jordan, and a couple other countries in the Middle East. It's almost like gathering a bunch of tribes that don't have too much in common, cramming them into a place that's now called a new country with no real natural barriers is a bad idea. And there was even a time in Syria's history, around 1958, where the government was just so worried about instability, coups, and potential communist influence that they asked Egypt to absorb them. And Egypt did, and for 3 years it was known as the United Arab Republic. But a quick coup in 1961 shot that down. But even during the time that Syria was quote-unquote stable under the Assad regimes, it was still a huge training ground for international terrorism. But now that training ground is gone, Syria has lost a bunch of its functionality to be a terrorist hot zone, and it looks like there may be some territorial ambitions for two countries. And the two countries are Turkey and this one country that recently defeated Iran in the 12-day war. For those of you who don't know, Syria was the perfect corridor that Iran would use to ship weaponry and other goods into Lebanon to fund that big H group we all know. But Syria also produced a great deal of weaponry for Iran, and that's been completely bombed to smithereens. I would be surprised if Syria had any real military productive infrastructure left at this point. And right now, the Syrian government is still persecuting the Druze in Suwaida to the south, and it looks like they are getting ready to wage a campaign against the Kurds up north. And so far, the new government hasn't been handling anything all that well, even though people were once hopeful that they could bring forth a new age and time for the country. And it's looking very doubtful right now. Now, the Druze in the south are upset, and they definitely do not want to come under the rulership of this new government. And there are some calls by the Druze to be annexed by America's hatchet man for the Middle East. But just remember, guys, Suwaida is right here. So if some of Syria was to be annexed, it wouldn't be completely separated. It would have to be somewhat landlocked. So most of the southern western tip of Syria could be taken if such an action were to happen. And Turkey has a reason to annex Syria simply because they want to get rid of any strongholds of the Kurdish resistance movements that are currently in the Syrian north. For now, Turkey has been attacking these Kurdish resistance groups through their own proxy forces in the country. But if they were to take control over this part of northern Syria, then there would not be any violation of international protocol for them to enact extraordinarily harsh measures to root out the YKK. But I think it would be much harder for Turkey to actually take this northern part of Syria just because the Kurds are very organized and they already have their own autonomous form of government. But if the Syrian government does start attacking the Kurdish north, it would be much easier for Turkey to do this takeover. And any territory that wasn't taken by these two countries, that would be the new Syria, as long as they could keep the ports right here. And I'm sure Russia would fight for that stringently, at least on the diplomatic scale. Maybe they would even send some mercenary forces. And for all we know, this has been planned for quite some time between these two countries who swear to be in strong opposition to one another, but that could just be a very convincing facade. I am the Geo Husar. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.